Good evening, everyone. Good morning in Australia. We appreciate your attendance at this event. We hope you will enjoy it. This series of lectures aims at listening to some of the most renowned language researchers in the world talk about their research and their concept of meaning. This will help us all expand our knowledge and vision of language and communication. Now, we will present a general introduction of today's lecturer's background.
Good evening to everyone in the Western Hemisphere and good morning to everyone in the Eastern Hemisphere. We are delighted to welcome you again to our distinguished lectures at Escuela Nacional Preparatoria 3, Justo Sierra of the UNAM 2020-2021, The Meaning of Meaning. Today's lecturers are Professors Anna Wierzbicka and Lauren Sadow from the Australian National University. The work of Professor Anna Wierzbicka is the quest for the elementary conceptual blocks of human thinking, feeling, perceiving, being, and becoming. That is, the semantic primitives and molecules that lie beneath the linguistic thread of millions and billions of conversations every day, every hour, every minute. These weave and string together a universal chant of human life and existence, of Dasein, if you will. Brought up in Poland, Professor Wierzbicka graduated from Warsaw University and emigrated to Australia in 1972, where she has lived since. She has published over 20 books and edited or co-edited several others. Her work spans a number of disciplines, including anthropology, psychology, cognitive science, philosophy, and religious studies, as well as linguistics, and has been published in many journals across all these disciplines. For instance, language, American Anthropologist, Man, Anthropological Linguistics, Cognition and Emotion, Culture and Psychology, Ethos, Philosophica, Brain and Behavioral Sciences, the Journal of Cognition and Culture, etc. Professor Sadow's work is just as fructiferous, engaging, and exciting. How does one take almost 50 years of work and experience in the Natural Semantic Metalanguage Research Program and applies it to the teaching and learning of English as a foreign or second language? This is no small deed. It calls for passion, dedication, and a pure love for the very demanding profession and art of teaching English. Professor Sadow has already co-edited and contributed chapters to the publication of 6 books. She has already placed a paper in the journal Australian Review of Applied Linguistics, and she has participated in 19 conferences, seminars, and workshops. Professor Sadow developed a natural semantic metalanguage-based cultural dictionary of Australian English, from theory to practice. She is currently working on developing the dictionary into an online resource and further developing the training materials and classroom materials associated with it. She is also lecturing at the Australian National University and working for the National Accreditation Authority for Translators and Interpreters. Now, without further ado, please let me welcome Professors Anna Wierzbicka and Lauren Sadow to our distinguished lectures, The Meaning of Meaning, with their lecture, Natural Semantic Metalanguage and its Applications to ESL. Welcome, Professors Wierzbicka and Sadow.
Thank you very much, Professor Sanchez, and big hello to everyone. We are very happy and honored to be invited to speak to you. So as you know, our topic today is the natural semantic metalanguage and its applications to English teaching. And the talk is divided into 2 parts. My first part of first half is a general introduction to the natural semantic metalanguage with some illustrations, and the second half of the talk will be given by my colleague, Dr. Lauren Sadow, specifically on the applications of NSM to English teaching. I will organize my general introduction in the form of 10 questions and 10 answers, some of them short and some of them a bit longer. So the first question is, what is the natural semantic metalanguage? Answer. It is an empirically discovered shared core of all languages. It has as many versions as there are languages in the world. For example, there is an English NSM, a Polish NSM, a Spanish NSM, and so on. But all these different versions match. Question 2. How was this shared core of all languages discovered? Answer. It was discovered over several decades of wide-ranging cross-linguistic investigations conducted by many scholars with hundreds of resulting publications. Question 3. What is this shared core of all languages like? Answer. It is a language-like. It's like a mini language. It comprises a mini vocabulary and a mini grammar. The words of this mini vocabulary have a different form, of course, and different properties in different languages, but they match in meaning. For example, the English words good and bad match in meaning with the Polish words dobry and zły, and with the Latin words bonus and malus, even though the Polish and the Latin words have many different inflectional variants, whereas the corresponding English words do not. So at the core of this vocabulary, there is a set of 65 semantic primes, which correspond to what Leibniz called the alphabet of human thoughts. These 65 semantic primes are concepts which are very, very simple, as simple as possible. They cannot be further decomposed, they cannot be defined, and they have exponents, words, or word-like elements in all languages. The table of primes is given on one of the slides, which you can see here now. Well, I don't have the time to go over this table, but this is really the key to our approach. Question 4. Can people actually speak in NSM? Answer. Yes. People can actually speak in NSM. That is, for example, in English NSM or in Polish NSM or in Spanish NSM or in any other NSM. Actually, one of our colleagues is now very sick in hospital, and the colleagues have been sending him messages written in NSM. Question 5. What would be some examples of sentences formulated in NSM? Well, examples which I'd like to quote come from a recent interview with the medical researcher Maria Giulia Marini in Italy, who emphasizes the therapeutic role of NSM in doctor-patient communication. For example, patients suffering from clinical depression can often express their thoughts and feelings in NSM sentences such as, I can't do anything, I don't want to live anymore, or nothing good can happen to me. When they cannot really express their thoughts and feelings in the more complex language, which is usually used by psychiatrists. So for example, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, known as DSM-5, and often described as the Bible of psychiatry, lists among the diagnostic criteria for depression feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt. But of course, psychiatric patients don't speak like that. They don't say, I have feelings of worthlessness. Or on the other hand, they may well say, I'm no good. I can't do anything. And this is pure NSM. I myself have heard psychiatrists asking a patient, do you have suicidal ideation? Something that a patient may not understand or relate to. Using NSM, the psychiatrist could ask instead, do you sometimes think I don't want to live anymore? Do you sometimes want to do something because of this? So no suicidal ideation, but the idea gets across. Question 6. How does this shared language of all people compare with ordinary languages? Answer, well, it is similar to them insofar as it can be used actually in ordinary human communication. But it is different because first, it is very restricted, and second, because it is essentially culture free. Unlike the words of full languages, the words of NSM do not carry any cultural baggage. Question 7. Do you expect us to believe that a language can be culture free and yet fit for human communication? Answer, yes. A very restricted language such as an English NSM or Spanish NSM can be both culture free and suitable for human communication within a restricted area. Maria Giulia Marini's examples of doctor-patient communication in English and in Italian illustrate this. But of course, a qualification is needed. Pure NSM is suitable for human communication only in a very limited range of situations. Question 8. Can NSM, for example, the English NSM or the Spanish NSM, be useful in some ways in a wider range of situations? Answer, yes. NSMs, for example, the English NSM or the Spanish NSM, can be very useful for communication in a relatively wide range of situations through their extended forms, known as minimal English or minimal Spanish, and so on. Question 9. What is minimal English? What is minimal English and how does it differ from English NSM? Could you give us an example? Answer. Minimal English is an extended form of English NSM. Minimal Spanish is an extended form of Spanish NSM, and so on. For example, I have published a long story about Christianity in minimal English and a parallel story about Christianity in minimal Polish, my native language. A Russian version of this story will be published before long in Russia. The English story is a part of a book entitled What Christians Believe, which was published by Oxford University Press in 2019. And the Polish story is part of a similar book published in Poland, in Krakow, in 2017. And the Russian version will be published before long as a book in Russia. All these versions go beyond pure NSM, but not far beyond it. And so they still match, at least to a very large extent. I would like to give you one example, the word God, in the Christian sense of the word, as it is used, for example, in the opening sentence of the foundational text for Christianity, which is the Nicene Creed of the 4th century. I believe in one God. What does it mean? Well, the Nicene Creed was formulated in the 4th century in Nicaea and Constantinople as a statement of the shared faith of all Christians. So the first part of the explication, which I show you here, is formulated essentially in NSM, and the last part in minimal English. I have omitted the middle part for reasons of time. So God, partial explication. There is someone not like people. The someone is someone above people. The someone is above everything. The someone is now or always will be. The someone is everywhere. There's no one else like this someone. God is the someone. People can't see God. At the same time, people can know some things about God. They can know these things because God wants it. And now I'm moving to this second part, which is formulated in minimal English. You will see the differences. People can know many things about God if they read a book called the Bible. It is a book not like any other books. God speaks to people in this book. This book has two parts. One is called the Old Testament. The other is called the New Testament. The Old Testament has many parts. It is like one book. At the same time, many books are parts of it. Many people wrote these books over a very long time. They wrote about things of many kinds. The New Testament is not like this. Not many people wrote it. These people didn't write it over a very long time. They didn't write about things of many kinds. They all wrote about someone called Jesus. When people read the New Testament, after some time, they can know this someone, Jesus. At the same time, they know this someone, Jesus, they know God. So you will notice the words book, read, and write in the second part of this explication. These words and their semantic equivalents in other languages are, of course, very important in many cultures, but they are not universal. This shows that this part of the explication is formulated in minimal English and not in pure NSM. Now, question 10. Since the central topic of this virtual conference is the meaning of meaning, I would like to devote my 10th and last question to meaning. What is the NSM understanding of meaning? And what is the essence of the NSM approach to meaning? So here is my answer, the NSM approach to meaning. The term meaning is often used in linguistics very loosely, and it is not clearly and precisely defined. Nor are there any clear and precise criteria on how to establish what the meaning of a given word or a phrase is, and how hypotheses about meanings can be verified. NSM is different in this respect from most other approaches because it has very clear standards for the description and verification of meanings. I will illustrate this difference between NSM and other approaches to meaning with an example based on a recent article by Cliff Goddard and myself. It was published in Language Sciences very recently. It is an article concerning the English word we and its counterparts in other languages. For example, in the Catholic Mass, the people gathered in church say to God, "We praise you, we bless you, we adore you, we glorify you, we give you thanks for your great glory." What does the word we mean in these sentences? Well, most linguists would say simply, well, it is a first-person plural pronoun. But such a technical linguistic answer does not show what the speakers mean when they say we. People don't mean the first person plural pronoun praises you, adores you, glorifies you. This shows that the supposed meaning of we, described in this way, cannot be substituted in context for the word itself. In effect, this means that the supposed meaning cannot be verified. From an NSM point of view, the meaning of a word is either a prime, for example, people, good, bad, happen, and so on, or a configuration made up of primes. Sometimes it can be a very complex and rich configuration, but this doesn't need to detain us here. I can't really talk about this now. If the meaning of a word is a prime, then it cannot be defined. That is, it cannot be decomposed into simpler elements. It is like an atom of meaning, good, bad, people. You cannot define those words. But if a word is not a prime, then it can be defined. It can be decomposed into simpler elements. As Cliff Goddard and I show in our paper, we is not a prime and can be defined. This means that its meaning can be shown by a paraphrase built out of primes and substitutable in context for the word we itself. So Cliff Goddard and I have proposed the following partial paraphrase for we. All these people or all these someones, I am one of them. There is also a third component in this explication, but I will ignore it here in this talk for reasons of time. So the crucial test is substitution. Does this paraphrase make sense when substituted for the word we in sentences like we praise you, we adore you, we glorify you? Well, I think it is easy to see that in fact this works well here. All these people here praise you. I'm one of them. All these people here, I'm one of them, praise you, adore you, glorify you. And now I would like to introduce a second illustration of the same point, also related to the word we. All linguists know that many languages in different parts of the world have two different forms for we, the so-called inclusive we and the so-called exclusive we. To explain these labels, linguists usually say that one of the two forms indicates that the addressee is included among those referred to as we, and the other that the addressee is not included. Well, in order to make better sense of such labels and to make them verifiable, NSM researchers proposed two hypothetical semantic components. You are one of them, and you are not one of them. All these people, you are one of them. All these people, you are not one of them. And then they test these hypothetical components in context. For example, when people in church say to God, we praise you, we adore you, we glorify you, is this an inclusive we or an exclusive we? Well, most linguists would say that it is not an inclusive we because God is not included among those who praise and adore God. So many linguists would conclude from this that this must be therefore the exclusive we in those languages which make the distinction between inclusive and exclusive we. But if one accepts the principle that meaning must be verified in context, one quickly discovers that it cannot be an exclusive we either, because it wouldn't make sense for the worshippers to say to God, all these people here praise you and adore you. I am one of them. You are not one of them. As if the thought could arise in anyone's mind that God could be one of the worshippers. So to make sense of such sentences, Cliff Goddard and I have argued that we, as used in these sentences, makes no reference to you at all, either including it or excluding it. The meaning of we includes here the components, all these people or all these someones, I am one of them, and does not include any components referring to the addressee. And the need for such a semantically neutral we, neutral with respect to you, is particularly clear when one considers sentences which are evidently not addressed to anyone, but still include the word we. Well, in a Christian context, this is the case of the Creed. For example, the Nicene Creed includes the following words about Jesus. For us people and for our salvation, he came down from heaven and became man. When people in a Christian community recite these words, they are not addressing them to anyone in particular. They are simply professing their faith. The phrase, all people, I am one of them, makes sense here, but there is no you in the speaker's minds. So the conclusion that Cliff Goddard and I draw from these and other similar examples is that there is no such thing as exclusive we. There is in some languages an inclusive we, which has the component, all these people, I'm one of them, you are one of them. And there is a semantically neutral, unmarked we, which makes no reference to you, whether including it or excluding it. It is the second semantically neutral we, which makes sense in sentences like we praise you, we adore you, we glorify you, directed by people to God. To repeat, the worshippers neither include God among themselves nor explicitly exclude him from their community, which would be unnecessary and ludicrous. The argument presented here can be somewhat perhaps difficult to grasp in an oral presentation, but the general principle should be clear. Unlike other linguistic approaches, the NSM approach provides very clear standards for both the description and the verification of meanings. These standards consist in first, paraphrase, and second, substitution in context. So before I hand over to my colleague, Lauren, I'd like to make to emphasize 2 points. One is that NSM is not just an effective tool for linguistic semantics and for the description of meanings, but also an effective tool for global communication. I cannot develop this here, but I can illustrate it with an example, with some examples taken. You have them here on the slide called Global Messages. These examples are taken from my Charter of Global Ethics, which was published in a book edited by Cliff Goddard, Minimal English for the Global World. So, it is very bad if people do very bad things to other people. It is very bad if people want to kill other people. It is very bad if men want to do very bad things to women. It is very bad if people want to say many things to other people if they know that these things are not true. Okay, these messages are directly cross-translatable into any language. So they can constitute a basis for a global discussion, a roundtable discussion about a global charter of ethics. So that's just in a telegraphic style, my first example. And the second point I wanted to make is that, well, it refers more specifically to the teaching of languages in general and the teaching of English in particular. Because NSM is directly cross-translatable, differences in meaning between words in different languages can be shown very explicitly through these words of NSM and minimal English as an extension of NSM. And I wanted to illustrate it very quickly with the English words illness, sickness, and disease, and I think Lauren will take it up in her part of the presentation. So what is the difference between illness, sickness, and disease? Well, this is a question that, for example, teachers of English have to deal with, and other languages don't have such concepts. They may have something related to, but they don't make the same lexical distinctions as illness, sickness, and disease in English. So let me just read these 3 explications to you quickly and point to some key differences. She was ill. Something bad was happening to her at that time because something bad was happening in her body. It was happening for some time, not a short time. She felt something bad at that time, not like at other times. She couldn't do some things at that time like at other times. And I will now read the explication of sick, just showing you how similar they are and yet different at the same time. She was sick. Something bad was happening to her at that time because something bad was happening in her body. It was happening for some time. She could know that something bad was happening in her body because she felt something bad in her body. So you can see the same references to feelings, to happenings, bad happenings in the body, but there are differences. For example, the time frame. In the case of illness, we say it's for some time, not a short time. In the case of sickness, it is for some time. There is no reference to a short time. Feelings are relevant in both cases, but sick also implies a certain awareness that a person has of something bad happening in the body because of how they feel. Well, these differences can be justified if you look at the whole range of how these words are used in context. I can't, of course, show it here now, but Cliff Goddard and I discussed it in details in a recent paper, which is in the press now in the Russian Journal of Linguistics. And just very quickly about disease. Disease is different from both illness and sickness because there's no adjective. So you can see immediately that this is an abstract noun, which takes a more sort of abstract and distant view of what is happening. Okay, let me just read it first. So a disease is something of one kind. People can speak about this something with the word disease. It's a kind of discourse topic. People can say something about something with this word when they think like this. So there's a cognitive scenario, a way of thinking associated with the word disease. Very bad things of many kinds can happen to people's bodies. When these things happen, they happen for some time, not a short time. They happen because something bad happens in these people's bodies for some time. Some people can know why these things happen in people's bodies. Okay, you can see immediately some components here which occur also in ill and sick, but some components are different. And also some components are missing. Like there's no reference here to how people feel. And there's no reference here to awareness, to what people can know. The whole emphasis is on what is happening in the bodies and why. And also that some people, presumably doctors or medical researchers, can know about this. So there is no sort of experiential or existential dimension to this. Well, we test, again, these explications just as in the case of we, by paraphrase, as you can see here, and by substitution in context in different sentences where these words are used. Anyway, I'm just signaling these things telegraphically. I think Lauren will say more about it in a minute. So to you, over to you, Lauren. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, so I'll come back to this illness, sickness, and disease question in just a moment. But what I'd like to do in my section of the presentation is to talk really concretely about how NSM can be used in language teaching. In English language teaching specifically will be the examples that I use, but of course, it can be used in any kind of language teaching, and I think as well in any kind of teaching more broadly. So as we've discussed so far, an advantage of NSM in language teaching is that there are such clear standards for describing meanings and those kinds of meanings that are important in all kinds of global discussions. But in a language teaching context, we have a responsibility to our students to not only teach the language and how it's used in general terms, but actually to teach competence with the language, including intercultural competence. So I'd like to break down this section of the presentation into 3 parts. 3 different ways that I see NSM being able to help ESL teachers teach English in language classrooms. I'll come back at the end and make a comment about teacher talk and different approaches to teaching. For the sake of time, I'm going to have to skip over a lot of the amazing research that's been done on different approaches to teaching languages. But of course, if I mention something that you'd like to know more about, feel free to ask me in the question time at the end. So I'm going to focus on kind of the core of language teaching, content, teaching the language itself. I'll discuss 3 types of content that you can see on the slide here. So first I'll talk about vocabulary and meaning, and then culture and values, and finally teaching about interaction and behavioral norms. You could say in some ways that teaching vocabulary is the bread and butter of language teaching. It is the absolute core of what we do. But often, and even more so in the digital age, if you've played with apps like Duolingo, for example, it's easy to make one-to-one comparisons or one-to-one equivalences between a student's first language and their target language, and then leave the explanation of those words just at that point. But the question becomes, what do you do about synonyms and other kinds of similar words or words with similar usages and meanings? How do you teach that difference in usage and the implication, like we've just looked at with sick and ill, etc.? I'm sure you can start to see already that with an NSM explication, breaking it down into all of those different segments, you can see where those words differ and how the usage would then change. So to illustrate this point with another example, I'll talk about 2 words, outstanding and impressive, for a moment. So again, 2 words that you can use in kind of similar contexts. So you can say an outstanding performance or an impressive performance. You can talk about someone's outstanding results or their impressive results, an outstanding meal, an impressive meal. But the implications of the 2 phrases are slightly different. In this explication here that you can see for outstanding, there are a few elements which are particular to this word, which I've highlighted here in red. So the first one is that it's not just very good, it's very, very good. And we've got the repeated very on the next line there as well. And then these two lines at the end. People can think about it like this: it is far above other things of this kind. And obviously that's going to be a common element in impressive as well. But if we look at the explication for impressive, we get, again, this is something very good, but not very, very. We get few things of this kind are like this, but not how above other things of its kind it is like. But the key difference here is this association between feeling something good like people feel when they see something very big. So if we think about the examples that I made reference to before, an impressive performance or an outstanding performance, there's this association of size that comes with impressiveness that's not there with outstanding. And it becomes particularly apparent if you think about like the word meal. So an outstanding meal is one that is excellent and above other things of its kind, but an impressive meal kind of has a connotation of size with it. You would almost expect an impressive meal to be a very large one in some way. So the next way of teaching language content that I'd like to talk about is teaching culture and values. There's a current turn teaching to focus on the intercultural culture and the danger of stereotyping, generalizing, and oversimplifying cultural concepts. But because NSM captures a language insider perspective of the concept, it can be used to describe a way of thinking that is shared or widely distributed across a population without actually saying that it is held by all speakers of that language or all members of that culture. So we do this with something, a sister theory to NSM called cultural scripts, which describe ways of thinking, attitudes, and ways of interacting. So in this example here of the English cultural script of personal autonomy, we can see that illustration of the shared concept in that first line, people think like this. It doesn't have to be all people. It's just expressing that this is a way of thinking that can exist within this language. So the cultural script is when someone does something, it's good if this someone can think like this. I am doing this because I want to do it. This cultural script is what we call a very high level cultural script, a master script in some ways, because it influences many of the other kinds of interactions that happen in English. And it's a connection. I'll come back to this in a little while. But cultural scripts like this make the invisible ideas behind language and the invisible values which drive meaning and usage visible to students. I'm going to make this really concrete and show you some of the worksheets for classroom use that I've developed. So this worksheet here is an example of using NSM concepts to define or identify a class's expectation of teaching at the beginning, for example, of a semester or a school year. So on this worksheet, students work through the first part, I think like this, to identify the way that they expect their interactions with teachers and classmates to go. After that, they then go and do this bingo exercise where they meet other students who think in the same way or who think in different ways to them. And this is a great example of how NSM can be used to raise awareness of students, awareness, of different ways of thinking, even within a small group like a class. So that then when they go into the world, they understand that even though some people can think in one way, not everyone necessarily thinks in that way. To move back to semantic meaning now, I'd like to talk about how cultural values often show themselves through cultural keywords. So cultural keywords are words which embody ideas within a lingua culture. And this example that you've got here on the slide of security is a great one in English. So the word security provides a shortcut through a lot of different cultural ideals in the English language. NSM is a powerful tool for explaining concepts like this, which seem or can seem inexplicable, because again, it breaks down that concept into its component parts from the insider's perspective. So the section in red here is the most important part of this explication. People know that something bad can happen in this place because someone does bad things. They know that if that happens, it can be bad for many people. They don't know when something like this can happen. It can be not like this if some people do some things. Because of this, it's good for many people if these people do these things. This is a core part of the meaning of security and why it is so important to English speakers. So to follow this idea of cultural keywords, this is a lesson plan and a worksheet for students in language classes on identifying their own cultural keywords from their first language. Lesson plan, they work through this worksheet, which uses NSM language to prompt students to think about concepts that they themselves hold. And then the teacher would scaffold a discussion that they can then bring in an English cultural keyword and compare different ways of thinking through an explication. So this is perhaps a good place to mention classroom levels in this talk. A comment that I've had many times from different teachers that I've worked with is that normally they only teach culture, normally they only teach this kind of content with their more advanced students once they've acquired a certain amount of language competence. On the other hand, though, I've also had many comments from teachers that say that NSM and the simple language in NSM is most suitable or even only suitable for beginners or for their very young students. I would argue against both these points. I would argue that cultural content like this is essential for all students of all levels and all ages. And the earlier that you can introduce cultural content like this, the better for students. I would say that on that perspective, the simple language of NSM can open the door to this kind of content to those students from earlier levels or younger age groups while you're teaching them. On the other hand, though, at the same time, students know their own abilities well. So if students are introduced to NSM concepts, they have a solid foundation that they can then use to reliably explore future and more complex meaning. So if you think about when you're trying to acquire a really complex concept in a language, if you know that you can talk around the concept to try and explore the meaning, then you're going to be more willing to try and communicate with those more complex terms. So by all that, I mean to say that the vocabulary of NSM is foundational for students of all levels and all backgrounds. As well, sorry, we'll come back to questions later. So NSM as an approach and as a way of thinking is also adaptable to all sorts of different levels and contexts. Anna already discussed with reference to minimal English that it is extensible throughout different languages. So in a previous project that I did, I worked with English teachers to custom build a minimal vocabulary for ESL and EFL classrooms. And that vocabulary was extensible based on the different outcomes or planned learning outcomes and the students' interests. So now to talk about the final way of teaching content in ESL classrooms, and that is of teaching interaction and behavioral norms, or pragmatics. So again, NSM uses cultural scripts to describe ways of behaving and communicating in languages. I don't want to repeat myself too much, but a lot of research has shown that students don't necessarily acquire pragmatics on their own, even through extensive immersion, but that explicit instruction supports students to acquire pragmatic competence. So as I mentioned before with the example of personal autonomy, values underpin the way that we communicate and the expectations that we have in communicating. So this includes all the way down to the meanings of particular words. So this example here, suggest, is an important word in English and can be used in many different contexts. The explication that you can see here, the point that I'd really like to make is about the last two lines. Maybe you will do it after this, I don't know. I know that if you want not to do it, you can not do it. So this connects it to that idea of personal autonomy, doing things because you want to do them. But what this explication doesn't show you is the expectation in many English language speaking countries, like Australia, for example, that if a boss says to you, a manager says to you, I suggest that you show it to John before you submit it. There's not really an expectation of an option there. The expectation is that you do that thing. So what we can do is pair an explication like this with a cultural script like this one that says many people in Australia think like this. And then the last lines, this person can want to say something like this with these words. I want you to do it. You can see the same two lines in the middle there from the previous explication as well. Again, note that it says many people in Australia think like this. So it's not necessarily all people, but it is a common expectation. The paired explication and cultural script can then be built into a worksheet like this one, which follows a well-documented approach to teaching cultural content by encouraging students to become ethnographers. So in this worksheet, you've got the explication and the cultural script. You discuss with your partner how the scripts might interact between an employee and a manager. Then students write a little script. They then draw a comic. They practice a conversation, which they then perform for the class. And then they reflect through discussion about how they feel about having interactions like that. You can build ideas like this into bigger ethnographic projects as well. This is a lesson plan series on an ethnographic observation, which then leads into writing some behavioral scripts for behavior on public transport. So these worksheets and the approach of using limited, simple words give students prompts to think about the different aspects of their engagement with the world, how they think and feel about their environment, and therefore how other people might think and feel about their environment. So as I said at the beginning, now I'll make a quick comment about teacher talk and pedagogy. If you're a teacher of any description listening to me, you may have already thought, I already explain things to my students using simpler words. And that is a big reason why I think that NSM can have such a positive impact on language education. Teachers everywhere already know and understand the principle of explaining using simple concepts, but the NSM approach gives a way to help those teachers think before they explain, and it gives a framework and a structure to help support those explanations. And it demonstrates really concretely that using simpler words doesn't have to mean simplifying concepts beyond usefulness. The other comment I'd like to make is that I'm not talking about NSM as a new way of doing language teaching. I'm not talking about it as a new pedagogy or a new methodology. You can see from the worksheets that I've presented to you that it's an approach, a tool that you can use that can be incorporated with, for example, task-based language teaching, communicative language teaching, content and language integrated learning, and even with the post-methodological turn. So it really works with whatever the established requirements for language teaching are in your institution or in your area. So basically, to summarize what Anna and I have both discussed, NSM is a small set of core concepts which are universal across all languages. By describing concepts using this restricted set of vocabulary, we make those descriptions accessible to all, regardless of their language background or ability. And an important part of research within NSM is that concepts are described from a language insider's perspective. So they retain all the complexity and the connectivity with other concepts and ways of thinking. So as a result, NSM explications and cultural scripts can explore concepts in much greater depth than any dictionary ever could. So explications, cultural scripts, and all the principles of NSM can all be used to enhance language teaching and learning, or I think even language teaching practices and teaching practices more generally everywhere. So thank you very much.
All right, that's really interesting, and we have quite a number of questions in the chat, I believe. I wouldn't like to abuse your time. I guess you have other things to do. So how much time would it be okay to take for questions, professors? 20 minutes, or you let us know?
Fine. Yeah. 20 minutes is fine.
20 minutes, all right. Professor Lauren Sadow, could you help us reading or selecting the questions that are in the chat? We asked our attendees to please type them in uppercase letters so that they are more easily located.
Perfect. Okay, I'll go through and choose some. So this is a good question for Anna. How does NSM describe colors and genders? Is NSM inclusive by default? And that's from Pavon.
Right, thank you. Well, two very big questions and very interesting questions. We have actually published a lot on the description on how to understand the colors, and not just colors. It's about visual semantics in general. So first of all, the assumption that in all languages people think about what they see in terms of colors is already a culturally biased assumption. Some languages don't even have a word for color. Many Australian languages are like this, and languages in other parts of the world. We use the basic concepts which are shared, where the key concept here is see, what people can see, what people in a place can see, and how they can think about it. Generally speaking, certain prototypes play a very important role here. So such reference points like blood, for example. Well, you can see what I'm talking about. I can't really produce detailed explications right now, but I've published a lot about this, how different visual concepts in different languages can be explicated through the same shared vocabulary, which doesn't use the word color or doesn't use the word shape, but uses only universal and translatable words such as see, people, like, what people can see, when people can see this, they can know such and such, they can think about it like this, they can think this is like what people can see when there's blood in a place, or when they see things growing out of the ground, or when people see the sky, or when people see the sky at certain times, because many languages have more than one word in the area of blue. Like, for example, Russian has those words "go boy" and "see," which is often translated into English as light blue and dark blue, but they are not light blue and dark blue from a Russian point of view, because they are different colors from the point of view, from the Russian point of view. So they just refer to what people see when they see the sky at certain times and under certain conditions and so on. So anyways, that's a sort of general explanation, a hint at how you can talk about visual semantics in different languages. Now, genders. What about genders? Well, one interesting thing about thinking about gender is that the words men and women occur in all languages. So that's the basis. They are not among the 65 primes, because these words are complex, semantically complex, and Cliff Goddard and I have explicated them through primes. This is in our book, Words and Meanings, which was published in 2014. So we have very detailed explications there. But the general point is that men, women, and also children, that these are universal human concepts. Also mother and father, these are words, and husband and wife. These are words which you can find in all languages. And by combining these words, you can explain lots of different concepts which are culture specific. The whole conceptualization of gender and age is different in different languages. We have written about this too. Like, for example, the word girl. In English, you have the word girl, which has a number of different meanings. But even in the most basic meaning, girls and boys and girls at school, again, this doesn't really match, for example, with the Russian word for girls, because Russian distinguishes девочки and девушки. I think Spanish too has a different categorization of gender and age-related words. But we have shown, in particular in this book, Words and Meanings, how all these differences can be explained in a very, very explicit way, showing what is different and what is the same. How can you explain девушки and девочки, for example, to Spanish speakers and English speakers without using complex Spanish or English concepts, but going only through those words which are shared? Okay, so I will stop there.
I'll come back to some other questions, but there's a couple I can answer really quickly. So somebody has asked, can I recommend readings to find out more about cultural scripts? I've put them on the slide on the, there were two slides there, one on references that I used throughout the talk and one on some further readings. So that was, if you're a Spanish speaker, there was a issue of the Sociocultural Pragmatics journal, I think this year or last year, which was a special issue on NSM written in Spanish. So that's an excellent resource for you to look at cultural scripts as well. But there are some other references on those slides there. So if you pause the video, pause the recording on those slides, and we're very happy to send this slideshow around as well. So there was a good question here about sick and ill used for the body or mind. Would you like to make a comment on?
What about sick and ill used for the body or mind? Well, the first point perhaps to make clear here is that the word body occurs in all languages. It's a universal, it's one of the 65, whereas the word mind is not. It's a very language-specific concept. For example, the English word mind doesn't match with the French words. In French, you have the words esprit and l'âme. And in Russian, there is really nothing like mind exactly. There is dusha, which is neither mind nor soul. It's something else. So the whole classification of what happens to people, which is not related directly to the body, is very, very culture specific. And again, there are lots and lots of publications, NSM-based publications, which show how this is differently conceptualized in different languages and how the differences and similarities can be shown. So when you really want to talk about bad things which happen to people, when you talk about bad things which happen to people's minds in English, you have to get away somehow from the word mind. And you have to learn how to say what you want to say, relying on universal concepts. So it could be that the person can't think. Well, think is a universal concept. Can't think, that's another universal combination. It can be that you feel something, or that someone feels something very bad because they think like this. Or you have to rely on these words: feel, think, know, want, can, can't, and make combinations of those. So the explications of sick and ill and disease that we have presented here, they're essentially body-based. But these words, you do talk about mental illness. People don't really speak in English about mental diseases, which is interesting in itself. And you can try to explain these differences in usage somehow by relating them to certain components in the explication of the words illness and disease and sickness. Mental sickness, no. Mental illness, yes. Okay, so it's a big topic again. I think I'll stop here.
But I think the important point is that by drawing those connections between the two things, you can draw parallels. So you can say something is happening to someone like when it happens to their body, for example.
Yeah.
There's so many great questions. Some of them will take a very long time to answer. Is NSM needful to learn basic English? I'm not sure whether that refers to the actual simplified version of English called Basic English or just a basic level of English competence. But from my perspective, I think that anyone learning a language would benefit from learning the 65 NSM primes and other universal concepts in a language first as a basis. Unfortunately, that hasn't really been done much in language learning yet. I'm a learner of many languages myself, and I'm always surprised at how long it takes throughout the language learning process before we actually get through all of the 65 primes. There is a website for English language learning called learnthesewordsfirst.com, which is a non-circular dictionary for learners of English, which builds up from the 65 NSM primes and then builds definitions to connect to the Longman Dictionary of Contemporary English. So if you're interested in NSM as a basis for language learning, that's a good place to go. NSM and translation.
There was also something about, is NSM useful for just explaining meanings or something else?
There was this one.
Yes,
Metalanguage?
I think so, yes, or can be defined in terms, or that's implied. Maybe that's something we could, Maurice Pico, right?
Yeah. Do you
want to read the question?
So the question is, does metalanguage in NSM only mean every other meaning can be defined in terms of NSM items, or does this term imply something further than this?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, first of all, it's just explaining all the other meanings through NSM. It's not a small thing. So I don't think this is just, it's very, very important and very big, especially in language teaching and so on. But nonetheless, the second part is also very important. No, NSM can be used for something quite different too. The important thing is that, and this is really also relates to somebody else's question about translation, that texts formulated in a full language, English or Spanish or whatever, are often very difficult to translate, as you know, because most of the words will not match. But what you can do is to start thinking in terms of NSM. And there are colossal advantages to this. If you start thinking in simple words, it's not just that it will be very easy to translate, because if you think in simple and cross-translatable words, well, translation will go very quickly and very easily without any problems. But also it forces you to clarify your thoughts. You cannot, as somebody, one of the respondents to my essential messages, I will tell you something about those essential messages in a moment, as someone commented, you can't really fudge in it. And the use of NSM often forces you to be very, very clear in your thinking, not just in how you speak, how you think. You cannot fudge. If you use complex words, often it is easy to glide on the surface of complex words and you think that you know what you are saying. But if somebody presses you, could you explain to me in simple words what you mean? You may discover that you really don't know. It's a very common experience. If you try to think in terms of simple words like I can do, people know, people want, people don't want, and so on, you'll discover that you cannot really fudge. You really are forced to think very, very clearly. So that's a colossal advantage. both from the point of view of translatability and accessibility to people, but also from the point of view of being forced to think clearly, And I mentioned those essential messages. I mean, we included this paper among your readings on the essential messages for the time of coronavirus, which I formulated in minimal English, and then the parallel versions were created in a number of other languages, including Spanish and Russian and Italian and Polish and Chinese and so on. And you can see all these advantages of minimal languages there, that first of all, you have a number of parallel texts, which in a sense, where the meaning is transparent, and it's also deeply cross-translatable. But the meaning is also stated very, very, very clearly. And another advantage there is that people often discover that when you state such messages in very simple words, very clear words which people can immediately understand, they can have a deep impact. Emotional impact, spiritual impact. You know exactly what people are saying. And when you share, you have this feeling that you can, for example, read those messages for the time of coronavirus in your own native language, and you know they match exactly what people say in other minimal languages, and that everybody can understand the same messages instantly. It somehow enhances the sense of human unity and human solidarity. I think it's particularly important for times of a global crisis like the current pandemic. I will stop there.
It's probably worth connecting what Anna just said as well to somebody else's question. What do you think is the harder part of learning NSM? I think the hardest part of learning NSM is that learning how to think and learning how to simplify what you want to say and learning about what it is that you're actually trying to communicate. Once you know how to do that, expressing it using only 65 words becomes very easy, but it's learning how to break it down in that way. So that was Danielle's question. I think we're going to be out of time very shortly. There was a question.
Something about good and bad, was there?
There was one about good and bad, but there was also one about grammatical differences, explaining grammatical differences in NSM.
Regarding aspect.
Like aspect and tense. The very short answer is yes, you can. I think that Cliff Goddard's recent book on 10 lectures on the natural semantic metalanguage is a good resource to read more about that. But perhaps, Anna, you've got more to say?
Well, the main point is that there are, I think, 9 universal concepts to this time. And you can learn how to express everything you want to say relating to time using those. So fortunately, we all have the words for before and after in our languages. Now, for some time, for a long time, for a short time. What else do we have now?
For some time?
Yeah, for some time, for a short time, for a long time, before and after, now. Well, we also have this wonderful word moment. In a moment, which in all languages, which moment is very important from the point of view of aspect, right? You have all the aspectual differences can actually be handled by combinations, relying on the words moment, in one moment, for some time, for a short time, for a long time. And look, my native language, Polish, is a language where aspect plays a key role. So I'm very accustomed to trying to explain or translate differences in Polish sentences which rely on aspect into English, where you don't have the same aspectual differences, but you have the same key temporal concepts, and you can do it. Okay.
Would you like to do the one on good and bad?
What was it?
So the question was, how do good and bad function in NSM? Do they stand for biological or physical or universal aspects?
Yes, good and bad. It's a very important question. People often wonder, puzzle, how can we say that good and bad are universal human concepts if they can be applied in so many different ways and so many different domains, and people can have such many different views about what is bad and what's good and so on. But the point is, it's not just the words good and bad. The words good and bad can be used in certain frames, and these frames are also cross-translatable. For example, I have written this Charter of Global Ethics, which I give you a few examples from this today. There are about 25 norms there. It is good if people want to do such and such. It is bad if people want to do such a, well, it is bad if people want to do bad things to other people. It is good if people want to do good things for other people. Even here, you can see different uses of good and bad. It is good if, and do good things for other people. These are very different uses of good, but they're both universal. All these frames are universal. So good can be applied in many areas, and bad too. But the words bad and good can mean exactly the same. You cannot explain them further. They're as simple as anything can be. You cannot define them, but you can use them in different frames to convey exactly what you are trying to say. They're extremely versatile, and that's very, very important for human communication and for human thinking.
And I think as well, I have an aunt who's a philosopher, and she argues with me often about the universality of good and bad. Of course, the words good and bad don't express what is actually good and bad in those languages, even though they are obviously closely related to those things. I think what Anna was saying as well is closely related to Hector's question. Does NSM imply the existence of a determined natural syntactic metalanguage, or can it underlie any syntax? So yes, NSM is not just about the universal concepts themselves, but they are combined in particular universal syntactic frames as well. So not all syntax is universal and can be cross-translatable. We've got resources on our website. There's the Griffith NSM homepage and nsmapproach.net. Again, I've put the nsmapproach.net on the slides for you, which gives you more information about that background. And you can also find, somebody asked a question about identifying primes in languages. The NSM homepage at Griffith is the place to go for more information about that as well. There's 150 canonical sentences, which will help you to do that in any language. And we always encourage people to look for primes in new languages, particularly minority languages and understudied languages.
Yeah, I will just add that somebody asked what is the most difficult part of learning of NSM. And it seems to me that we could say that learning the grammar may be harder than learning the vocabulary, because once you have your table of 65 primes, well, that's not so difficult to learn. There's also a table of what we call universal semantic molecules, words like men, women, and children, and so on. You can learn these words. That's not so difficult. But you have to learn the frames, grammatical frames, which are universal. So people who want to start to use NSM, they often use complex syntax, such as relative clauses or gerunds, or which are not universal. They're not universally cross-translatable. So I think that now, after decades of working with NSM, we have learned what is the core human grammar too. Grammar which is really cross-translatable. So for example, I can say, I think confidently, that those frames from the Charter of Global Ethics, which I quoted, are cross-translatable. It is good if people think like this. It's not just the words, but the whole frame is cross-translatable. It is good, I want to do something good for someone else. The syntax is cross-translatable too. You have so, but anyway, if you want to start using NSM, the first principles would be very easy. Just avoid all complex words and avoid all complex syntax. But these are the first guidelines. But then you have to learn in practice what you have to avoid. Like, for example, if you don't use relative clauses, that's already progress. If you don't use complex sentences, use simple sentences. Well, there are some complex sentences which are okay, like if. If this happens, something else will happen. That's totally cross-translatable. You know, it's a complex sentence with if, but it's cross-translatable. But sentences with and or are not cross-translatable because the words and or are not cross-translatable. Because is cross-translatable. This happened because such and such happened, or this happened because someone did something. That's fine, even though the sentence is relatively complex, right? But those linkers, because and if we know that are universally cross-translatable, and so on. So grammar will take a bit of time, well, more time perhaps than learning the cross-translatable human vocabulary.
All right. I think we have already taken the time that we had thought would be okay to dedicate to questions. We are really, really extremely grateful, extremely honored that you have been here with us. I am sure that this lecture is going to echo and resonate for days and weeks to come. And so our deepest and fullest gratitude for you both, to you both, professors Lauren and Anna. Just a quick message to our audience. We're going to disclose, I'm going to disclose, I already sent to the chat the registration form for the certificates. Maybe our audience would also like to say hello and goodbye to you both. So if anybody wishes to turn on their microphones or even their cameras and say goodbye to both of our dear...
Great lecture, great, awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure and a joy to be able to speak to you and to communicate with you, to interact with you.
Pleasure to meet you. Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure to have you. Nice day.
You have changed my life. Thank you. I'm truly grateful for both of you.
Thank you so much. All the best. All the best to all of you.
And thank you. Bye-bye. Joe, for inviting us. It's a great honor to be invited. So we greatly appreciate that as well.
Thank you a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Really interesting. Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks for sharing your knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. It was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
I would also like to remind everyone that this will be loaded. This is already been transmitted via YouTube, and it will be available for everyone in the following hours, so that this continues to have an impact on everyone that is interested in these topics. So I think that most people have already said hello and goodbye. And I would just like to add that hopefully we can have another lecture sometime in the future. I know you are very busy professors, so we wouldn't like to abuse your time, but hopefully in a few months or next year, you might have another occasion to share your knowledge and all your experience with all of us. So thank you very much for being here, professors. We are really thrilled to having had this great, awesome opportunity of listening to you the way we have done today. Thank you so much. Our warmest appreciation for you both. So that should be it for now. I hope that everyone joins in the next lecture. We'll disclose details via email. You are both also invited. If you wish to join, I will send you the information of our next lecture. And well, goodbye, professors Anna Wierzbicka. Did I say it correctly? I'm learning. And Professor Lauren Sadow. Thank you very much. This has been really meaningful for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye, professors.
Bye.
And goodbye, everyone. And thank you for being here. We're very happy that you all attended this lecture.
Bye. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank
Very
you.
much. Thank you very much.
Gracias.